The ultimatum, the great chamber of eternity's spire, hung in the darkness of neutral space. A massive station built by ancient hands long before any living species had learned to walk among the stars. And within its walls, the fate of humanity was about to be decided by creatures who believed they already knew the outcome. Ambassador Sithrak Velanoon stood at the center of the speaking platform, his scaled body towering over the human delegation, his yellow eyes filled with the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. And his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across an empty sky. "The Vethkai Dominion has watched your kind for many cycles," he declared, his clawed hand sweeping across the holographic display that showed 12 human colony worlds spinning in the void. "And we have decided that these worlds belong to us now, along with the 4 billion mammals who infest them." The chamber fell silent as representatives from dozens of alien species watched from the observation galleries above, their eyes fixed on the small group of humans who sat motionless before the reptilian warlord. And many of them had seen this scene play out before with other species who had faced the Dominion's hunger. Admiral Helena Vance sat at the head of the human delegation, her gray uniform bearing the marks of 30 years of service, her face showing nothing of what moved behind her dark eyes. And she listened to the alien's words with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that silence could be its own weapon. Sithrak continued his speech with the practiced ease of a conqueror who had delivered such ultimatums many times before, explaining how the Vethkai had built their empire across 200 star systems over 10,000 years, how they had crushed 17 species who had dared to resist, and how humanity now faced a simple choice. "You may surrender these worlds peacefully and accept your place as vassals of the Dominion," Sithrak said, his thin lips pulling back to reveal rows of serrated teeth. "Or you may resist and join the extinct species whose names we have erased from history." A murmur rippled through the observation galleries as the watching aliens exchanged knowing glances, for they had studied humanity as well, and they believed they understood what would happen next. Because humans were famous throughout the galaxy for one thing above all others: humans are always compromised. Every intelligence report confirmed this truth, showing how human factions fought among themselves over resources and ideology, how their corporations battled their governments, how their colonies resented their homeworld, and how they always chose negotiation over confrontation when the stakes grew too high. The Illuminate Collective had watched humans argue for decades over trade agreements, and the Kryn Federation had seen humans back down from border disputes rather than risk open warfare. And even the mysterious observers had noted that humanity seemed to lack the unified will that other species possessed. Sithrak was counting on this weakness as he stared down at Admiral Vance with contempt barely hidden behind his diplomatic mask, certain that she would ask for time to consult with her fractured governments, certain that the humans would argue among themselves until they had no choice but to accept whatever scraps the Dominion offered them. "I will grant you 30 standard rotations to deliver your answer," Sithrak announced with a magnanimous wave of his clawed hand, "though I suspect you will need far less time to accept the inevitable." Admiral Vance rose slowly from her seat, her movements deliberate and calm, and she met the ancient warlord's gaze without flinching, without showing fear, without showing anything at all. "We will consult with our governments," she said, her voice flat and professional, "and we will return with humanity's answer." Sithrak watched the humans depart with satisfaction warming his cold blood, turning to his advisors with a rumbling laugh that echoed through the chamber. And he spoke loud enough for the watching aliens to hear his prediction. 30 rotations, he said with absolute certainty. "And these soft creatures will beg us for mercy, just as every other species has done before them. Because mammals are weak and humans are the weakest of them all. The observation galleries emptied as the alien representatives hurried to send reports to their own governments, describing how the mighty Vethkai Dominion had finally turned its attention to the young human civilization. And most of those reports concluded with the same assessment. Humanity would surrender because that was what humans did. But far below the chamber, in the docking bay where the human shuttles waited, Admiral Vance walked with steps that grew faster and more urgent with every passing moment. A calm mask falling away to reveal something that none of the watching aliens had seen. She was not afraid. She was furious. Her aide, Commander Chen, matched her pace as they boarded the shuttle, his young face pale with the weight of what they had just witnessed. And he asked the question that burned in his mind. "Admiral, what do we do now? Because we cannot possibly fight the Dominion, can we?" Vance did not answer until the shuttle had cleared the station and docked with her flagship, the carrier TC's Relentless. And only when she stood on her own bridge surrounded by her own crew did she allow herself to speak the words she had been holding back. She opened a priority channel that connected to Earth and Mars and every colony world across human space. And her message was heard by presidents and generals and ordinary citizens alike. A single sentence that would change the course of galactic history. "Execute Prometheus contingency," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's answer, all of it. Across the vast distances of human space, those words triggered something that had been waiting in the shadows for over a century. A plan that had been passed down through generations of military leaders who knew that someday humanity would face a threat that could not be negotiated with or compromised away. In the Galactic Concord Chamber, Sithrek Velanun celebrated his coming victory with his officers, drinking to the conquest that would add 12 more worlds to the Dominion's collection, never suspecting that he had just made the worst mistake of his 10,000-year civilization. He had threatened humanity's children, and humanity did not compromise when it came to family. The silence, the galaxy expected panic from humanity, but instead, there was only silence. In the first days after the ultimatum, alien spies and merchant ships waited at the borders of human space, watching for the signs of chaos that always came when a civilization faced the Vethkai Dominion. But the trade ships that normally traveled between human worlds simply stopped coming. And the communication channels that usually buzzed with human voices went completely dark. Sithrek Velanun received reports from his intelligence network every morning. And every morning those reports contained the same troubling words that made his scales itch with an unfamiliar feeling. No information available. The Dominion had spent decades building a spy network inside human space, recruiting informants and placing listening devices and bribing officials who were willing to sell secrets for credits. But now every single one of those sources had gone silent, as if they had never existed at all. On the colony world of New Singapore, a Vethkai spy named Krath tried to contact his handler with urgent information about human fleet movements. But before he could send his message, 3 humans in plain clothes appeared at his door, and he was never heard from again. On Mars, a listening post hidden inside an abandoned mining facility suddenly lost power when human soldiers cut through the doors and dismantled every piece of equipment inside, leaving nothing but empty rooms and confused Dominion analysts who could not understand how their location had been discovered. Across every human world, the same pattern repeated itself as humanity closed its doors to the outside galaxy and turned inward with a focus and unity that no alien observer had ever witnessed before. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a bunker that had been built during humanity's first interstellar war and maintained in secret ever since, the leaders of the human race gathered around a table that had not been used in over a century. Counselor Thera Mikkelsen represented Earth's unified government, her silver hair pulled back from a face that showed the weight of the decision she had helped to make. And beside her sat Director Okonkwo of the Mars Industrial Consortium, whose factories had built the backbone of human civilization. Admiral Vance stood at the head of the table, presenting the Prometheus contingency to leaders who already knew its contents, because they had all sworn oaths to protect this secret when they took their positions, just as their predecessors had done for generations. "The Vethkai believe we are divided," Vance said, as holographic displays showed the true state of human military power. "And we have allowed them to believe this because it served our purposes. But now the time for pretending is over." The displays revealed what humanity had been hiding in plain sight for over 100 years. Every major corporation had been required by secret law to build their facilities with military conversion in mind, which meant that the cargo freighters that hauled goods between worlds could accept weapon systems in less than 72 hours. And the mining lasers that carved asteroids were actually military-grade particle beams with their true specifications hidden behind fake documentation. The colonial militias that the galaxy dismissed as disorganized farmers with guns had actually been running coordinated training exercises for 4 decades, practicing battle tactics that Earth's military had developed specifically for a war of survival. Director Okonkwo activated a display showing the Mars shipyards, where massive vessels that had been officially listed as under construction or decommissioned were actually complete and waiting in hidden docks carved into the red planet's moons. "We have 3,200 warships ready for deployment," he announced, his deep voice carrying the pride of an engineer who had overseen the greatest secret project in human history. "And we can have another 800 converted and armed within 2 weeks. Counselor McKelson looked around the table at the faces of humanity's leaders, seeing the same determination in every eye, the same cold anger that had united them the moment they heard the Vethkai threaten to enslave their people. "The colonies have voted," she said, "and every single world has agreed to open their strategic reserves. Even the pacifist settlements that have refused to participate in military matters for generations. Because this is not about politics anymore." She paused and let her words sink in before continuing. "This is about survival. Across human space, the greatest mobilization in the history of their species began in perfect silence. Factory workers on Luna abandoned their civilian projects and began assembling weapons components that had been designed decades ago and stored in warehouses marked as containing agricultural equipment. And shipyard crews on Titan worked around the clock to install railgun batteries on hulls that had been built to accept them from the beginning. Soldiers who had served their terms and returned to civilian life received coded messages that activated their reserve status, and they reported to hidden facilities where uniforms and equipment waited for them, ready to transform peaceful citizens back into warriors. The silence from human space grew deeper and more ominous as the days passed, and the alien races who watched from outside began to whisper among themselves with growing unease. The Illuminate Collective sent a coded message to human leadership offering sanctuary for refugees, and they received no response, which told them everything they needed to know about human intentions. The Kryn Federation transmitted intelligence about Vethkai fleet movements, and a single word came back through the darkness: "Acknowledged." One message arrived anonymously from an unknown species, containing just 8 words that spread through the underground networks of the galaxy like fire through dry grass. "The mammals have teeth, and we always knew." On the 29th day after the ultimatum, Sithrek Velanoon sat in his command chamber aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion, reviewing the intelligence reports that his officers had compiled from every available source. And for the first time in his 200 years of military service, he felt something cold crawling up his spine. Every page of the report showed the same words: no intelligence available. Every spy had vanished, every informant had gone silent, and every listening device had been destroyed, as if humanity had simply erased every trace of outside observation from their entire civilization. Sithrak stared at the report for a long time, his yellow eyes narrowing as old instincts that had kept him alive through countless battles began to scream warnings that his pride refused to hear. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. But he pushed the feeling aside and ordered his fleet to prepare for the conquest that would begin in one more day. Because surely the humans were simply trying to delay the inevitable. Surely they would appear with their surrender when they saw the might of 800 Dominion warships arrayed against them. He had no idea that he was about to learn the true meaning of silence. The Vethkai Armada assembled in the darkness of the obsidian expanse on the 30th day. 800 warships arranged in perfect formation at the edge of human space. Their weapons charged, and their crews eager for the conquest that their commanders had promised them. Sithrak Velanoon stood on the bridge of his flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical display with satisfaction as his fleet organized itself into the attack formation that had crushed 17 species before. And he allowed himself to imagine the glory that awaited him when he presented the surrendered human worlds to the Dominion Council. "Lord Commander," his tactical officer announced, "our sensors detect a single vessel approaching from human space." Sithrak smiled with predator teeth, certain that this was the expected envoy coming to deliver humanity's surrender. Perhaps even that same female admiral who had sat so silently during his ultimatum, now broken and ready to beg for whatever mercy he might grant. "Let them approach," he commanded with a wave of his clawed hand, and broadcast their groveling across the fleet so that all may witness the submission of another inferior species. The shuttle emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of sensor range. A tiny vessel painted in the gray colors of the Terran Coalition Navy, moving slowly toward the massive Vethkai formation like a mouse approaching a gathering of hungry serpents. Every ship in the Dominion fleet turned their sensors toward the shuttle as it came to a stop between the two forces. And every crew member waited eagerly to hear the words of surrender that would mark the beginning of a new conquest. The shuttle's communication array activated, and a human voice filled the bridges of 800 alien warships. But the words that came through were not the words that Sithrak Velanoon had expected. "This is Captain David Oilerin of the Terran Coalition Navy," the voice declared, calm and steady and completely without fear. "And I am here to deliver humanity's response to your ultimatum." Sithrak leaned forward in his command throne, his yellow eyes fixed on the tiny shuttle displayed on his view screen, and he waited for the surrender that must surely follow. "The Terran Coalition does not recognize your ultimatum," Captain Oilerin continued, his words striking like physical blows against the confidence of every Vethkai officer who heard them. "Because we do not surrender our people, we do not abandon our worlds, and we do not compromise on the survival of our species." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the Dominion fleet as officers exchanged uncertain glances. Because this was not how conquered species were supposed to respond. This was not how any of the previous victims had faced the might of the Dominion. "You have threatened our children," the captain said, and something hard and cold entered his voice as he spoke those words. "And you have demanded that we kneel before you like the species you have destroyed before us. But you made one terrible mistake in your calculations." The shuttle began to move, sliding slowly to one side as if making room for something behind it. "You believed that humanity was weak because we choose peace when peace is possible. And you believed that we were divided because we allow ourselves to disagree about things that do not matter." Sithrak felt the cold sensation return to his spine as he watched the shuttle continue its sideways movement, revealing nothing but empty space behind it. Empty space that his sensors insisted was completely vacant. "But we are not weak," Captain Oilerin declared with absolute conviction in his voice. "And we are not divided, not when it truly matters. Not when our families face extinction at the hands of tyrants who have never learned what happens when you threaten the wrong species." The captain paused for exactly one heartbeat before delivering his final words. "Our answer is behind me." And then the sky broke open. Light exploded across the obsidian expanse as faster than light. Signatures bloomed across every sensor array in the Vethkai fleet. Not dozens of signatures, not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of ships tearing through the fabric of space in perfect synchronized formation. Sithrak Velanoon rose from his command throne with a roar of disbelief as his tactical display filled with so many contacts that the system could barely process them all. And his officers shouted in confusion as they tried to make sense of what was appearing before them. 3,200 human warships emerged from faster than light travel in a single coordinated jump. The greatest fleet ever assembled by any species in recorded galactic history, arranged in battle formation and ready for war. Dreadnoughts, the size of small moons, took position at the center of the formation, their massive railgun batteries already tracking Vethkai targets. And around them swarmed carrier groups carrying thousands of fighter craft piloted by humans who had volunteered for the most dangerous duty their species could offer. Destroyer wolf packs prowled the flanks of the formation, sleek and deadly vessels designed for one purpose alone. And behind them came the support ships and logistics vessels and medical frigates that would keep the fleet fighting for as long as necessary. But the ship that drew every eye and froze every heart was the vessel that emerged at the very center of the human formation. The TCS Unconditional was a Titan-class command ship, a vessel whose existence had been officially denied for 50 years. A floating fortress that dwarfed even the largest Vethkai dreadnought. And its hull bristled with weapons that alien intelligence agencies had never even imagined. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of that impossible ship, surrounded by officers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. And she opened the channel that broadcast her voice across every frequency. "This is Admiral Helena Vance of the Terran Coalition Navy," she announced, her words reaching every ship in both fleets and every spy satellite and listening post in the sector. "And I am here to deliver humanity's counteroffer to the Vethkai Dominion." She paused to let the full weight of the moment sink into the minds of 800 Dominion commanders, who were staring at their displays in horror. "Leave now," she commanded with the voice of humanity united, "or we will demonstrate why our species has never been conquered and never will be." Sithrak Velanoon looked at his tactical display and saw the truth that his pride had blinded him to for 30 days. The humans outnumbered his fleet 4-1. They had never been weak. They had let him believe they were weak. And now he understood with terrible clarity what that silence had really meant. The doctrine of decisive for Sithrak Velanoon was no fool and no coward. And in 2 centuries of commanding fleets, he had learned that sometimes retreat was the only path to future victory. So he made the only decision that made sense when facing a force 4 times the size of his own. "All ships retreat to the Dominion border," he commanded through gritted teeth, his pride screaming against the words, even as his tactical mind knew they were necessary. "We will regroup and return with reinforcements." His fleet began to turn, 800 warships pivoting toward escape. But Admiral Helena Vance had studied every battle the Dominion had ever fought, and she knew exactly what Sithrak would do before he did it. "Negative," she said from the bridge of the Unconditional, her voice carrying to every captain in the human fleet. "Execute Operation Hammerfall. All phases, no mercy." The human fleet surged forward like a predator that had finally been unleashed after a lifetime of waiting. Phase 1 began with the electronic warfare ships that had been hidden among the human formation, specialized vessels that existed for one purpose alone. And they activated systems that flooded every Vethkai communication channel with noise and static. Sithrak shouted orders into his command console, but his words never reached his captains. And across his fleet, 800 ships suddenly found themselves isolated and alone. unable to coordinate, unable to receive commands, unable to do anything except fight as individuals against an enemy that moved as one. Phase 2 struck before the Dominion officers could adapt to their blindness. The human dreadnoughts opened fire with their main railgun batteries, launching projectiles of dense metal at 3% of the speed of light. And those projectiles crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds, too fast to dodge, too powerful to stop. Vethkai ships exploded like fireworks across the darkness of space as the kinetic rounds tore through shields and armor and hull plating. And in the first 60 seconds of the battle, the Dominion fleet lost 40 vessels without firing a single shot in return. Sithrek watched in horror as his formation disintegrated under the human assault. Ships scattering in every direction as their captains tried to escape the killing field. But there was no escape from Phase 3. The carrier groups released their fighter swarms. Thousands of small craft piloted by humans who flew with a ferocity that no Vethkai warrior had ever witnessed, attacking with complete disregard for their own survival, pressing their attacks so close that they could see the fear in alien eyes before their weapons struck home. Commander Yuki Tanaka led her destroyer squadron on a flanking maneuver that her instructors at the academy had said was impossible, driving her 5 ships through a gap in the Dominion formation and emerging behind the enemy line where their vulnerable engine sections waited. All ships concentrate fire on those cruisers, she commanded as her tactical display painted targets across her view screen. And make every shot count, because we are not going home until this is finished. Her destroyers opened fire with coordinated precision, their weapons tearing into 6 Vethkai cruisers that never saw the attack coming. And secondary explosions rippled through the enemy ships as their power cores overloaded. But the Dominion warriors were not helpless prey, and they fought back with all the skill and fury that had made them conquerors of 200 worlds. A Vethkai battle group managed to restore partial communications and formed a defensive cluster, their combined firepower destroying 2 of Tanaka's destroyers in rapid succession. And the commander felt her ship shudder as enemy weapons found their mark. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, her damage control officer reported, and we have lost main propulsion. Tanaka looked at her tactical display and saw a Vethkai carrier turning toward her crippled vessel, its fighter bays opening to release craft that would tear her ship apart. And she made a decision that would be remembered for generations. All hands abandon ship, she ordered calmly. And engineering, give me everything the engines have left. Her crew rushed to the escape pods as Tanaka locked in a collision course with the enemy carrier, pushing her dying vessel forward on emergency thrusters. And she stayed at her command station as her ship crossed the final distance. For the colonies, she transmitted on an open channel, and then her destroyer struck the carrier's engine section at full speed. The explosion destroyed both vessels and damaged 3 more Vethkai ships that were too close to escape the blast. And across the human fleet commander, Tanaka's sacrifice became a rallying cry that drove her fellow warriors to fight even harder. The battle raged for 4 hours as the Vethkai fought with desperate courage against an enemy that gave them no room to breathe, no chance to regroup, and no hope of escape. Human tactics were unlike anything the Dominion had faced before, because humans did not fight for territory or honor or glory. They fought for the complete destruction of their enemy's ability to ever threaten them again. Every time a Vethkai ship tried to surrender, human vessels would cease fire and allow the crew to evacuate before destroying the empty hull. But they never stopped, never paused, never gave the enemy time to recover. Sithrek Velanoon stood on the bridge of his flagship as his fleet crumbled around him, watching the tactical display that showed 600 of his ships destroyed or disabled. And he finally understood what he was facing. These were not the weak and divided humans that his intelligence reports had described. These were predators who had been hiding their teeth, waiting for the moment when hiding was no longer necessary, and now that moment had arrived. His flagship shuddered as human weapons tore through its shields, and his officers reported that 4 dreadnoughts had surrounded the Eternal Dominion with their weapons locked and ready. "Lord Commander," his communications officer said with despair in his voice, "Admiral Vance is demanding our surrender." Sithrak stared at the display for a long moment, seeing the ruins of his once mighty fleet scattered across the obsidian expanse, and he activated his distress beacon for the first time in his long career. But on the bridge of the Unconditional, Admiral Vance looked at the surrender request and shook her head slowly. "They threatened to exterminate us," she said to her officers, "and they have done the same to 17 species before us. And if we accept their surrender today, they will return in a century to threaten our grandchildren." She opened the channel to the entire fleet and spoke the words that would end the Vethkai threat forever. "Today we end the cycle. All ships advance." The new doctrine, the Battle of the Obsidian Expanse, ended with the complete destruction of the Vethkai invasion fleet. 800 warships reduced to debris and memories in less than 6 hours. And the galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated what it truly meant to threaten the wrong species. Sithrak Velanoon died on the bridge of his flagship, when human weapons finally overwhelmed the Eternal Dominion's failing shields. And his last words were recorded by the ship's emergency systems before the final explosion claimed him. "We should have studied them longer," he whispered as fire consumed everything around him, finally understanding the terrible mistake his civilization had made. The Dominion Council received news of the disaster through terrified scouts who had witnessed the battle from the edges of the system. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the rulers of the mightiest empire in known space felt something they had only ever inspired in others. They felt fear, but humanity did not stop with the destruction of the invasion fleet, because Admiral Vance and the War Council of Sol understood something that the Vethkai had never learned in all their centuries of conquest. Victory in a single battle meant nothing if the enemy could rebuild and return. Over the following 6 months, the Terran Coalition Navy systematically dismantled everything that made the Vethkai Dominion capable of threatening other species, sending task forces to every shipyard and weapons factory and military academy in Dominion space. The human ships arrived without warning, their weapons already powered, and they delivered the same message to every facility they encountered. "Evacuate all personnel within 1 hour, because this installation will be destroyed, and anyone who remains will share its fate." The Vethkai military commanders wanted to resist, wanted to fight back against the invaders who were tearing apart everything their ancestors had built. But their ships were gone, and their weapons were inadequate against vessels that had crushed 800 warships in a single afternoon. Human Marines landed on Dominion worlds to secure strategic targets, and the Vethkai civilians who watched them pass through their cities saw something unexpected in the eyes of these soft mammals who had proven themselves anything but soft. The humans did not loot or burn or massacre. They destroyed military targets with precise efficiency and then moved on, leaving hospitals and schools and homes untouched, showing a discipline that confused the species who had only ever known the Dominion way of total conquest. The Vethkai homeworld was never attacked, and the billions of civilians who lived there were never harmed, because humanity had not come to commit genocide. They had come to ensure that no other species would ever face the threat of Vethkai conquest again. When the Dominion government finally surrendered unconditionally, Admiral Vance traveled to their capital world to deliver humanity's terms in person. Standing before the same council chamber where Sithrak Velanoon had once planned his conquests. "You will disarm completely for 100 years, she announced. A voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, where frightened Vethkai leaders listened in silence. "And you will pay reparations to every species your empire has conquered and enslaved." The council members nodded quickly, eager to agree to anything that would end the nightmare that had consumed their civilization. But there is one more requirement, Vance continued, and this is the most important of all. She activated a display that showed images from throughout HFY history, images of conquered worlds and enslaved populations and species that have been erased from existence. You will teach your children the truth about what your empire did, she commanded. Every atrocity, every genocide, every act of cruelty committed in the name of Dominion expansion. Because your children must understand what empire costs, and they must never forget. The council agreed to every term, and the documents were signed. And the HFY Dominion that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years officially ceased to exist. 6 months later, the Galactic Concord Chamber on Eternity's Spire, filled with representatives from every known species, gathered to witness humanity's formal address to the galactic community. Ambassador Lysara Venn of the Illuminate Collective stood at the speaking platform where Sithrak Velanoon had once delivered his ultimatum, and she spoke words that would be remembered for millennia. "We have watched humanity for generations," she began, her ancient eyes sweeping across the gathered representatives. "And we believed that we understood them, that we knew their weaknesses and their limitations, that we could predict how they would behave when tested." She paused to let her words sink into minds that were still struggling to process what they had witnessed. "We thought they would splinter under pressure because they allow themselves to disagree, and we thought they would compromise because they prefer peace, and we thought their divisions made them weak." Her voice rose as she delivered the truth that every species in the chamber had been forced to accept. "We were wrong." She turned to face the human delegation, where Admiral Vance sat with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the crisis, showing nothing of the fire that burned beneath. "Your divisions are not weakness," Lysara declared. "They are a choice you make because you can afford to disagree about things that do not matter. But when you choose unity, when something truly threatens what you love, you become something that has not been seen in this galaxy for 10,000 years." She spread her arms wide as if embracing the entire assembly. "You become a species that cannot be intimidated, cannot be outlasted, and will not be stopped." The chamber erupted in sound as dozens of species voiced their agreement, and humanity's representatives accepted the recognition with quiet dignity. 1 year after the Battle of the Obsidian Expanse, Admiral Helena Vance retired from military service and moved to a small home on a colony world in the Kepler system, one of the 12 planets she had fought to protect from HFY conquest. She spent her days tending a garden and watching children play in fields that had nearly been reduced to ash, finding peace in the simple life she had earned through a lifetime of service. One afternoon, a young girl approached the old woman working among the flowers, curious about the medals that hung in the window of her small house, and she asked the question that children always ask. "What did you do in the war?" Admiral Vance set down her tools and knelt to meet the child's eyes, smiling softly as she remembered everything that had brought her to this moment. "I reminded the galaxy that humanity does not compromise on family," she said simply, and that was all the answer the child needed. Across the galaxy, in council chambers and throne rooms and military academies, a new doctrine spread among every species capable of interstellar travel. A simple warning that would guide galactic politics for generations to come. Do not threaten human children. Do not threaten human worlds, and never mistake human patience for weakness. And in the classified archives of a dozen civilizations, a single phrase was added to their official assessment of humanity. 3 words that carried more weight than any treaty or alliance. Status: do not engage.